Hey guys, welcome back. This will be video number 2 for me. And today I just want to talk a little bit about reverb. More specifically, I wanted to go over reverb in the Helix and ways to get those ambient tones and to be able to get kind of those bigger, spacier reverbs. I know that's been kind of the primary knock against the Helix for quite some time is, oh, its reverbs aren't up to par with, say, Strymon or New Neighbor, or, you know, pick whatever brand you prefer. I mean, they're not wrong for the most part, but I'm going to try and show you today ways that you can kind of get around some of the deficiencies of the stock reverbs, specifically utilizing the really incredible routing power of the Helix and how you're able to kind of really sculpt things. I'll explain it more. I don't want to get too deep into it in the intro, but you get the idea. So I want to go into that a little bit. So that excerpt I just did right now, real quick here, I'm using Suhr Classic Pro. I was in the 2 position, which is the bridge and middle together. Really love that tone. I'm using the new Lone Star amp, which was part of the 2.5 firmware update for the Helix. So then what I have is basically, and I'll show you in a second, I'll do the screen capture, but basically what I have is, I'm going to call it a wet-dry setup. It's not exactly wet-dry, but it kind of behaves the same way. So essentially I have 2 paths. I have path A and path B. And path A just goes through a simple plate reverb. I also have a delay that goes to both, but it was very, very slight delay. You probably barely even hear it. And then path B is 100% wet. And what I mean by that is turning the mix 100% up on at least one of the effects in path B. And I'll show you that in a second, it'll make more sense. But just bear with me here. So basically, what that enables me to do is have my full dry signal or my mostly dry signal, or as dry as I want to let it get, on path A, and then using the split block, I can mix in the wet signal. Now on top of that, because it's 100% wet, the first effect, for example, anything I put after that is going to affect, in this case, the reverb's trails. So if my first reverb is at 100% mix, everything after that is going to affect the trail of that reverb. The stock reverbs before the 2.5 update didn't have any modulation. So I created this setup to be able to get around that problem and be able to add modulation to the reverb trails to get that kind of spacey ambient sound. And I kind of took it further and kept messing with it until I landed on what I'm currently using, and I'll show you guys in a second. But it's a very flexible setup that allows you to do kind of anything you want. Now, in 2.5, the firmware update in 2.5, Line 6 added some new reverbs, right? So I think 5 or 6 new reverbs. I was very excited, like many other people, to try them out, and I did, and I was kind of disappointed. Obviously, free reverbs are awesome, free effects, obviously it's great, but it's not what I was looking for. So I took some time comparing them and the setup I'm about to show you, and I preferred this setup every time. I made some clips, I posted them online. Everyone seemed to prefer this setup as well. And it's just so much more, I have so much more control over how it sounds in the end. So I think it's kind of the better way to go personally. But in a future video, I'll probably do some more stuff on the new reverbs. But basically, just to summarize my feelings, they're extremely dark, even if you have the tone maxed, excuse me. They're very dark. And I don't like the super dark reverbs because it just turns to mush really quick. I like to have a little more high end in them. Also, they have very weird modulation. And what I mean by that is the modulation is, the rates are really fast, even with it the rate all the way down in the settings. One of them, I think it's the plateau, is basically has like a flange effect in the trails, and it just sounds very weird and not super musical, at least what my ear is tuned for, I guess. There's just I was pretty disappointed. They also have some kind of weird wet-dry mixes, specifically the Ganymede one, I'm pretty sure is it's called. 50% mix, it still doesn't have the wet level isn't enough, and you turn it up turn the mix higher, you lose your dry signal, so you compensate with the level, and it's not quite enough. So anyways, I digress. I'll get into that maybe in another video. But for now, I just wanted to go over kind of my reverb setup that I use in all of my patches. It takes up a little space, but not so much that, you know, I can still have 2 delays, modulation, compressor, and EQs, and have, you know, no problem whatsoever in addition to the reverb setup I'm about to show you. So it doesn't take up a whole lot of space, and it just sounds really good. It's really, really musical because it's, you know, it's things that we all know, chorus, and I have chorus, for example, on the trails. And it just sounds really, really good. And you can get exactly how you want. And then I use Snapshots, which I'll explain probably in a future video. I use Snapshots, which is a feature of the Helix. And then I can adjust the mix level, the dry and wet mix level, to get exactly what I need throughout the song. And or you can, you know, set it up to the expression pedal, which I've also done, so you can kind of swell in the wet. So there's a lot of options. I'm going to get into it. Yeah, so let's go ahead and check it out. I'll play some more clips as well. So yeah, all right, let's get into it. Hey guys, let's go ahead and check out the patch now. So yeah, like I mentioned before, I'm using the new Mesa Lone Star amp. They call it the Cali Texas, and they've only modeled the channel 2 of the amp so far, which is more of the martially gainy side of the amp. But it's still a really good kind of crunch, edge of breakup kind of amp. These are the settings right here. You can see them hopefully. And then let's go over the patch overall, and then we'll get into the main point of this video, which is this section right here. So starting off with the regular deluxe comp, going into the amp, and then you'll notice I'm not using IRs. I decided not to, mainly just to show that IRs don't really matter that much. They, it's definitely just a huge time suck going through all of the IRs. But once you find a couple good ones that work with certain amps, then it's great because they're just plug and play. With the stock cabs, you got to work a little bit more, go through the mics, find different combinations. You have more control over things like the distance right here. So yeah, there's a little more work involved, but you can get just as good of tones with the cabs, stock cabs, as you can with IRs. So yeah, so right here I'm using splitting right here, and I'm going into the Dr. Z 212 cab on here. I'm using the SM57, 1 inch off, nothing crazy there. And then the other cab is the matchless greenback side of the 212. I'm using a 160 ribbon, which is a really nice mic model in here, 3.5 inches off, so that it cuts a little bit of the low end. And same as the last patch I talked about in the last video, pan 70% left and right. I'm not a big fan of the hard pan of 2 different sounds. I like it a little overlap, so I think 70% is usually a pretty good mix. Going down here, everything is in stereo because it's a stereo patch. You'll notice, if you don't already know, this little symbol right here shows that the block is stereo. So these are all stereo going all the way through. This is the important bit. We'll skip over that for now, but we have the plate reverb. Just to add a little bit, doesn't matter. EQ, I mentioned in my last video, I use a parametric EQ at the end of chain. Just to kind of fine tune everything. In this case, I turned it off just to kind of show it's not really necessary. You don't need that to get a good sound. I just have it to tweak it a little bit. I do have the low and high cut, which is necessary. 85 hertz on the low end, 12 kilohertz on the high end, and finally a compressor at the end of chain. I'll get into that in a future video, other tips and tricks. That this is one of them. The studio comp is really nice. It kind of warms up the tone and kind of just lifts everything up. I really like what it does at the end of the chain. Not everyone likes that. The compression, you know, it's pretty low, so it's not a super compressed sound. Anyway, so let's go back to what we're here for. Now, first and foremost, it's important to have the split AB right here, not split Y or split crossover. What this allows me to do is treat A and B independently and mix between the two. What I mean by that is right now I'm A100, which means that right now the signal is going directly across here. It's not going through this section here. So all I have is this plate reverb. Once again, using the Suhr Classic Pro, tuned to standard tuning, but the low string is tuned to C. So it's a long story. I haven't tuned it for whatever reason, but anyways, this is what it sounds like. So that's the amp, pretty clean, as you can hear, with single coils, a little bit of play. I'll go over to the bridge humbucker so you can hear how it breaks up. So yeah, so it, you know, it's kind of crunch territory with the humbucker, and then nice and clean with the next single coil. So that's 100% A, path A, which means just as plate reverb. Now, if we go down here, so basically what this does, this split setup right here, is it allows you to create basically, I mean, not exactly, but for the most part, it's the same concept, a wet-dry rig, right? So what you're doing here, instead of running two different amps, like a traditional wet-dry setup, you have one dry amp and one wet amp. And what that means is one amp gets just the like overdrives, you know, you might have a little modulation in it or something, up to you, no hard and fast rule, but in general you have one amp that has just overdrives, no delay, reverb, modulation. The other amp has everything, so it has the overdrives, the reverb, the modulation, everything, and usually a higher mix of the effects, since you have the dry amp keeping your clean signal nice and center and present. So what this does is the same kind of thing. So you can look at path A as your dry amp, right? So in this case, we just have a little bit of plate reverb, and it's, you know, basically serving it's basically what it's doing is it's serving as the dry path so that the signal, my clean signal, is nice and present. And then path B, right here, if you go 100% B, means it's only going to be this side. Now, for it to work as a wet-dry setup, you need the first block at minimum to be 100% mix right here. So what that means is now A is normal, just a little bit of plate reverb. B, path B, is 100% this cave reverb. No dry signals getting through. So I'm just going to show you what that sounds like real quick. So you'll notice there's a little delay there because I have a pre-delay up. We can get into that another time, but in this case, just a little bit of pre-delay. And that was the sound. So it's, I'll stab it real quick. So not a super inspiring reverb sound. Certainly probably one of the contributors to people saying that, you know, Helix reverbs aren't very good. It's just kind of bland and a little sterile sounding by itself. But now, because this is 100% mix, anything I add after it is going to affect the tone of that reverb. And so if I want it to be a modulated reverb, which I do, I then add in a modulation effect, in this case a Trinity chorus. And just to reiterate, it's important everything is stereo, every block, for this to work properly. So now you have Trinity chorus, you know, pick your poison, whatever effect you want. What that's going to do is add in a little movement, stereo movement, to the reverb itself. So I'll demonstrate that. So you can hear kind of that sine wave of modulation, and kind of within the stereo field, you can kind of hear it moving a little bit. Now, that definitely helps, but it sounds a little artificial. So the next step is going to be adding a dual delay. And none of this is you have to do it this way. This is just what I've come upon, and definitely tweak this, you know, to fit your needs. But this is kind of a good starting point. Now what the dual delay does, it serves two purposes. One, it extends the trail of the reverb. So it kind of keeps it going longer. Two, is it adds a little stereo movement. And the dual delay does that because it's stereo and it ping-pongs the repeats. So one repeat will go right, then left, then right, then left. So what that does is it basically adds little bursts of reverb left and right. So it adds movement that way. So I'm going to demonstrate that real quick. I'll just stab it. Turn my tone off on accident. So right now it's set to sync up quarter and a dotted eighth. and BPM is not set to anything in particular, but it's fairly fast, so I'll slow it down just so you can hear it a little easier. Oops. Okay, hopefully you're able to hear that. So it's kind of just bouncing it around. Now, that's going to be a little distracting to have that kind of this burst of reverb, you know, left and right, left and right. So the last and most important part of this is adding in another reverb, in this case a hall, and you can experiment with other ones. And what this does, it serves to encapsulate all the effects and basically make it sound like one complete reverb. Instead of a reverb with effects added to it, it now sounds like one complete reverb that's got modulation and this cool kind of effect within it. So what that does is it just kind of melds everything together and makes it sound like a high quality reverb. So I'll demonstrate that. So yeah, so now everything is melded together and it doesn't sound artificial. It doesn't have any of that kind of weird sound. It doesn't sound sterile anymore. It just sounds good. And now if we go back here, so this is your split, right? So that was 100% wet. If I go back to A100, this is going to be 100% dry. And once again, 100% wet. So now what I can do with this is find a place, a mix between dry and wet that fits what I'm looking for. On top of that, if I right click right here on the computer, click Snapshots, now this is assigned to my snapshot. So this is right now set to intro. So say my intro is going to be super wet, right? So it's a really kind of spacey intro. And then let's go over to verse. Now verse is going to be dry, completely dry. So now I have set up this really big spacey tone. So that's my intro tone. And I go over to the verse, completely dry. So it's as simple as that. So now basically what this does, this setup, is it allows you to have this really big, high quality sounding ambient reverb in your back pocket. And so I have all of my patches set up with this so that whenever I need it, it's there. And also you'll notice that I still have, despite having these extra blocks here, I still have two delays, two stereo delays, a modulation, two stereo EQs, and a compressor. So I have plenty of room. You know, I have every effect I could ever want, really. I mean, I've already got a delay up here, I got two more here, modulation. If I need another delay, I can remove the modulation. You know, there's plenty of flexibility here. So I'm not hurting for like, oh man, I need another reverb or something. I have no room for it. There's plenty of room here. But what this allows me to do is be ready for any of that kind of situation where I need that big, really high quality sounding ambient modulated reverb. And so I'm able to do that with this. And if I don't want it, all I do is make sure that A is at 100%, or you know, somewhere in between, maybe 81%. So you still barely hear it at 80. Or if you want something really, really out there, then maybe it'll go like B20 here. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If you are having any trouble with this, please feel free to pause the video or send me any questions if you have any. But if you just kind of look at it, it's pretty simple. Now the last part I want to talk about is this section right here, the mixing section. You'll notice that I have A and B both center, because if you were to pan them left and right, you'd have your dry signal on one side and the wet signal on the other. That would sound weird. To me at least. So I like it center, but this is the cool part. With the levels of path A and path B, you can further determine the effect level and the dry level in relation to each other. And what I mean by that is, say I want a lot of reverb in ambience behind my playing. So say I want around here. but I do not want my dry signal to disappear. All I have to do is boost up the A level, which is just dry, or drop the B level so that I still have a lot of reverb behind my playing, but my dry signal is still completely intact, or it's still very present. And so I can really fine tune the levels. That's one of the biggest issues with the new reverbs for me, is that the mix effect levels are a little strange, a little wonky to me. You can't really get the dry signal relation to wet signal right with them. You know, you can boost the level and boost the mix, but then you don't have enough level and it doesn't sound quite right. This you can get exactly what you're looking for. And then the modulation on those new reverbs aren't very musical. You know, one of them's basically a flanger on the repeats. Or on the decay of the reverb, it sounds very weird. The other ones, you know, it's just not super musical for what my ear is tuned for. Maybe you love them. I personally am not a big fan of them, but it's fine because we have all of this capability within the Helix already to come up with exactly the kind of reverb you hear in your head. So if you want that Strymon sound, you want that New Neighbor sound, whatever, I fully believe you can get something that's completely comparable just within the Helix itself using this routing setup. And then you have all this additional control to get exactly what you want, and then you can adjust it for different parts of the song so you can really fine tune it. And say you want one really big pad for one part of the song, all you gotta do is set the decay higher using snapshots, and then you know, you can have that set to one snapshot, and then it's all there for you. So it's super, super powerful. Really, really, really good. This kind of fixed any complaint I had about Helix reverbs once I kind of spent some time, sat down, and figured out this setup. It's fixed any issues I've ever had, and everyone that I've showed it to has been completely blown away by and has adopted it. So it's been it's really good, I think. But let me know what you guys think. For now, I'm just gonna go ahead and do some clips of me playing various little excerpts for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I love hearing the suggestions. I got such a great response from the first video. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah, if you have any ideas for future videos, please let me know. Any comments, questions, please let me know. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching.